Hi guys, Josh Munday here, and you've just seen me play part of Pride and Joy by Stevie Vaughan, recorded in 1982. This recording is quite an amazing sound, a great tone. Stevie Vaughan is known for this, and he used different amplifiers, really thick gauges of strings, strats, some vintage strats, and it's just a great tone. So let's have a look at how we can break that down into the elements of the tone and see if we can't recreate that tone using the Boss GT-1 multi-effects. Firstly, let's try and break it down into what I call the 4 elements of tone. So the guitars used, the pickup selection that was used on that guitar, the amplifiers that were used, and then any effects that were used. And by effects, I don't just mean any chorus, reverbs, delays that were running to the front of the amp or in the effects loop of the amp, but also anything that affected the tone, including the room that it was recorded in, the microphone that was on the amplifier, was there a second room mic in the room, what did the room sound like through that microphone, when it was recorded, any EQing or effects that were added afterwards or post-production effects, and even the mastering process. These can all change the tone of the guitar tone. Let's start to build that tone up within the Boss GT-1 multi-effects. Stevie Vaughan used strats, not this strat, but certainly late 50s and early 60s vintage strats he particularly liked, which can sound a little bit darker sometimes, but still it was a 3 pickup, 3 single coil configuration guitar. The pickup configuration or selection for that particular song is between the neck and middle pickup. So we'll leave it on there. Next, the guitar amp. He legendarily used one of the Howard Dumble amplifiers in this recording, and also 2 Fender vibroverbs. He had a 412 cab for the Dumble and 2 vibroverbs as well. Whether they were recorded all simultaneously or separate for separate tracks, we're not quite sure. But it doesn't really matter in the end. What we'll do is just try and focus on that tone and see how we can reproduce it with one of the amplifier simulators in the GT-1. Before we turn on the amplifier or any effects for this tone, it's important to note that it's tuned in E flat. Now I'm tuned in concert pitch at this point, and I don't actually want to change that, so I can use the GT-1 to bring it down half step. So that's the first thing, because we need to do that first because it adjusts the tone of the guitar slightly. So if we're going to build up the tone after that, we need to make sure we've done that first. So let's turn on the 1 step down pitch shifting. Now I've agonised quite a bit over what type of amplifier to use for this, and I went through a bunch of different options, but now I've settled on one particular one. If we go into preamp here and we press edit, we'll be able to see what I've selected in the signal chain. Press enter, and we've gone to a natural clean type of amp. That would seem like maybe a strange amplifier to select because there are Fender style amplifiers in there, but this seemed to have the right characteristic. So let's keep moving on here. I've put the gain to basically halfway. If we go over the page, we can have a look at the EQ. Now I've boosted the bass a little bit beyond half, boosted the mid-range almost to the top, and boosted the top end almost to the top as well. Then over the page here, you see that I've got the presence control about halfway, the brightness switch on, and the original speaker type that goes along with that particular type of amplifier. So let's have a listen to that with the right pickup selection. Now I think that's fairly close. It's got a nice mid-range or low mid-range sort of push to it, which we want, but there's some other elements of that recording which we haven't quite got yet. There's, to my ears, there's a slight vibrato, a chorusing type effect on it, so I'm going to add a little bit of vibrato for a small amount of movement, and we'll add some room ambience as well, and also a slight delay to give us the room mic simulation, which I'll explain in a moment. So firstly, the modulation here, we can see I've got vibrato, rate reasonably high at 64, but the depth quite low, so it'll just give us a little bit of movement in that tone. So firstly, without it on, and then with it on. Really just gives us some sparkle in the top end and a small amount of movement to that tone. So next we're going to add the single delay that will simulate the room mic for us. So what I mean by simulating a room mic is with a single delay, and I mean a delay set to 0 repeats, which is actually 1 repeat, each millisecond that I change that can represent 1 foot away from the speaker cabinet. Okay, so it's kind of a cool way to be able to simulate a room mic without actually having one. So let's turn that on, and we can see in the delay section I have 10 milliseconds, so we're simulating 10 foot away from the speaker cab, 0 feedback, which means 1 repeat, and I've put it up quite high so we can hear it in the mix. It's a subtle change, but it does change the EQing of the amp. Let's listen to it without it on. With it on. So it does simulate the air between the speaker cab and that first microphone, which is a slightly different tone. And the last thing is just a small amount of space, so a little bit of reverb to give it a little sense of that room that it's recorded in. So I've got a hall reverb here, 2.1 seconds, and effect level fairly high. So now we should be pretty close to that tone. So that's one way we can reproduce the recorded tone of Pride and Joy by Stevie Ray Vaughan with the Boss GT-1 multi-effects. Thanks very much for watching.